Okay, so now we're going to talk about the ending of your story. Your story's written, but you're not sure how to end it. If you want your readers to feel satisfied after reading your story, a well-written ending is essential. Let's start by taking a look at 3 questions you need to check off to make sure you have a satisfying ending. The first question is the main conflict resolved? By the end of your story, your conflict should be resolved in some way. Even if it's not a happy ending, the most pressing conflict should be over for the most part. Okay? So the conflict in my story was the issue between my mom and I. The conflict was I did not want to return that watch. I didn't want to be embarrassed. So there's a conflict between my mom and I. And I tried to get out of it by throwing the watch in the field. And then I ended up having to return it because my mom dragged me there by the ear to return the watch. In Frog, the conflict is that the frog is in the house and Bree wants him gone. By the end of the story, she has gotten the frog out. That conflict has been resolved. Second question is, are all the other loose ends tied up? So one of the things that I needed to end my story with about the watch is, why did I take the watch in the first place? Okay? I dealt with a lot of issues of being jealous of my friends and all the things that they had, because I didn't have as much as my friends had, especially this friend of mine. She had just all kinds of cool stuff. And I couldn't take the jealousy anymore, and I wanted all the stuff that she had. A lot of things that I didn't have, so I just took the watch. And I had the opportunity to take the watch. Okay? So, other things might happen in your story that need to be wrapped up by the time you're done. In Frog, Bree makes a mess in several rooms of her house. It's important to mention that she has cleaned this up. If she didn't clean it up, that would be okay too, but the story should then include the parents' reaction when they saw the mess. Okay? So one of the things that I need to do is talk about how my friend Kim forgave me, because she did, and she was still my friend, and I was pretty amazed by that, because I'm not sure that I would have done the same thing to her. So it's pretty important for me to include that in somewhere in the story towards the end. Okay? If in the Frog story, if Bree hadn't cleaned up at the end, that would be okay too, but the story should then include the parents' reaction when they saw the mess. We just can't have her mess up the house and then just drop that detail before the story is over. Same should happen in your story. Make sure your reader isn't going to have any unanswered questions by the time the story is over. Okay? So Tiana was writing a story about a homeless man that she gave him something like, I don't remember, she gave him something from McDonald's. But it needs to kind of wrap up the loose ends of that question that I have, like, is she going to do this from now on? Did she learn something from doing this for a homeless man? Was she able to put herself in his shoes, like having empathy for him? So we need to add some of that information to wrap up those loose ends. Do we get a glimpse of how different things will be now? Okay? In a good story, something should change by the end. Make sure your readers can tell what that is. So for me, I never stole anything from a friend again. Okay? The story Frog was about more than just a frog. Bree wanted her independence, and by the end of the story, she's gotten it, but she realizes it comes with big responsibilities, bigger than what she expected. We needed that last scene to see that Bree has grown to appreciate her parents more. She realizes that she's strong enough to handle, tough situations like the one with the frog. Okay? So that's one of the things that I learned, is not to take things from my friends. But I also learned to maybe instead of saying something to my mom, I also learned that I was going to hide things from her from now on, so that I wouldn't have to go through that embarrassment of giving her the watch, of giving my friend the watch. So I learned not to tell my mom things, not to lie to my mom. I learned how to hide things from my mom. So sometimes things change for the better, and sometimes not so much. So, how do you actually write the ending? We'll look at 5 different types: summary, description, gesture, dialogue, and interior monologue. So the first type is a summary, where you just summarize the situation or what the character has learned. It's not the most creative or moving type of ending, but it gets the job done. So if you're that kind of person, you're like, I just want to summarize what happened and finish this, then this is the way you would do it. Here's a different way Frog could have ended if it used a summary ending. Okay, and you can pause this so that you can read it. And this is a summary ending. If you end with a description of something, an object, a person, a crowd, you can create a mood or suggest a character's state of mind without having to explain it. Suppose that instead of showing that Bree was feeling confident by the end of Frog, we want to show that she really didn't want to be left alone anymore. We could have ended that story with a description of her parents sitting beside her. While Dad went into his room to change, Mom kicked off her shoes, took her earrings off, and snuggled up next to me on the couch. I pulled my blanket over her knee and leaned into her, inhaling her perfume. My father joined us a few minutes later and curled up on the other side, the 3 of us like a sandwich. Although Bree's description doesn't come right out and say it, it shows us how happy and safe she's feeling to have her parents back home. If we end the story there, the reader is left with a strong sense that Bree is mostly relieved to have her parents home and isn't thinking much about having time to herself anymore. Okay? Another way to finish the story is to have your main character do some sort of gesture or action that shows that something has changed. So, this is how Frog ends. When Bree lifts the remote and puts on another episode of Arthur, it's a way of showing that she's comfortable with her decision. You can also end your story with dialogue, a direct quote from one of the characters. In that same example from before, if we just took off the last line, we could end the story with a quote instead. It would be just fine. Okay? That sounds great. That's the dialogue, sorry. Finally, a story could be ended with a few lines of interior monologuing, where we hear a character's closing thoughts. If we wanted to do this with the original ending, we could remove the last 2 lines and instead add a line of interior monologue. So if it were me for my story about my friend Kim, maybe I would end it with something like, and that's the last time I was on, that was the last time that I hid that's the last time that I showed or told my mom that I stole something. Okay? So, here's an example of the interior monologue. I would be just fine. So, finding more ideas. Keep in mind that there are lots of other ways to end stories. To give yourself a better variety of choices, look at other short stories and novels and explore the different ways they end. Also, look through the story you already have. You might find that there's already a line or section that would make a great ending instead. So, right now, you're going to read your story or have someone else read it and go through the checklist for a good ending to make sure your ending meets all of those items. Try some of the 5 ending styles with your own story until you find one that you like best. If you want more ideas, look at other stories and see how the authors chose to end them. Your ending might already be somewhere else in your story. You might just need to move it to the end. And I'm going to give you a PDF version of this mini lesson so you can look at that checklist. I'll show you what that looks like.